It's over. It's over. Knicks fans, this is not a dream. Your long wait has ended. Go ahead and cry. After 53 years, the Knicks are finally NBA champions once again.
Joel Embiid is a playoff choker. Jokic is the best player alive. Rudy Gobert is a fraud. Jaylen Brown should be in the MVP discussion. Wemby is already the best player in basketball. Small guards can't be your best player. Now that the NBA playoffs have come to an end, almost every single one of those takes look completely different. See, every NBA season creates new narratives, but very few destroy old ones. And the 2026 playoffs, it did exactly that. Players that spent years trying to shake certain labels finally escaped them, while others suddenly found themselves carrying criticisms nobody expected. These playoffs didn't just crown a champion, they completely changed how we remember an entire generation. Now, before we get into anything else, I really want to give a quick shout out to the New York Knicks for winning the NBA championship this year, which it still doesn't even feel real for me to say that. But yeah, as somebody that grew up in New York, I have friends and I know a lot of people that are Knicks fans, so I know the absolute hell that team took them through for many, many years. So to see them finally be able to hoist the Larry O'Brien trophy, it's really just a great thing to see, honestly. And it honestly gives me some hope that my Jets can get there someday. Who am I kidding? But yeah, these playoffs, it proved a lot of us wrong. So today we're gonna break down how each of these players were discussed before the playoffs started, as well as how their performances in these playoffs flipped all of those narratives on their head. But before we continue, y'all know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Now, without further ado, let's get back to the video. Now, I can't think of anybody better to start with than Joel Embiid. Now, if you're familiar with the NBA, you've probably heard a lot when it comes to Joel Embiid. And most of it is probably negative, from the fact that he's always injured, or the fact that he always seems to drop off in the playoffs. And then there's the fact that he's never been to an Eastern Conference Finals. I mean, even when he won MVP, people were saying that he probably shouldn't have won it. But yeah, with the way things were going before the playoffs even started, it seemed like this was just gonna be another one of those years for Joel Embiid. Because just like it's been for practically most of his career, Joel Embiid seemed to have the worst kind of injury luck. As right before the playoffs, he had to have surgery. But somehow, some way, 11 days later, this man was able to return from injury. But even then, it seemed like it was all for naught, because at the time, the Sixers were down 3-1 to the Boston Celtics. But then the impossible happened, because Joel Embiid was not only dominating in the games that he played, but he was also leading his team to wins. Take a look at these stats here. 26 points, 33 points, and 34 points in a closeout Game 7. Joel Embiid was the difference maker in that series versus the Celtics. And in my opinion, he was the reason why the Celtics blew that 3-1 lead. Because right after he came back, everything, and I mean everything, shifted for Philadelphia. So yes, you've heard that right. Joel Embiid was the reason for a 3-1 comeback versus the Boston Celtics of all teams. Now, when I say the amount of respect that people have for this man just immediately went up, and for good reason, because Joel Embiid did not have to come back for this playoff run, especially 11 days after having an emergency surgery. But for him to do that, perform as dominantly as he did, and lead a 3-1 comeback, you just have to give him his flowers. And now I know he did struggle a bit versus the Knicks in the next round, but I believe this is one of those moments where you really do have to give him some grace. But now we really got to look at the flip side of this, because we got to talk about Jaylen Brown. See, before this playoff started, Jaylen Brown was in MVP discussions because he helped lead a Boston Celtics team that was missing Jason Tatum to a high playoff seed. But for him to go from that to being on the other end of a blown 3-1 series lead is honestly crazy. And now it's the fact that Boston is trying to get rid of him, as it was rumored that he was supposed to be involved in the Giannis trade proposal. And now that Giannis ended up in Miami instead of Boston, things might be a bit dicey there in Boston with Jaylen Brown. Not to mention the crazy stuff that he was saying on live stream after they lost, where he was saying how happy he was this year, which oddly enough coincided with the first year that he actually got to run his own team. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's on another team before the season starts. Now, Joel Embiid and Jaylen Brown weren't the only players who had narratives shifted during the first round of this year's playoffs, because the same thing happened to Nikola Jokic. See, before this year's playoffs, Nikola Jokic was known as probably the best player in the NBA, and if not the best, at least top 3. And of course, we know he won multiple MVPs. He led his team to the NBA Finals in 2023, where he won a championship. And overall, he's just been consistent and dominant every single season. He puts up numbers consistently as a big man that just don't even seem to make sense. He's an automatic bucket from in the paint, he can space the floor, and he's an incredible and absolutely incredible playmaker. And it was to the point where it didn't seem like it mattered who you put on him in the playoffs. Nikola Jokic was gonna dominate either way. It almost seemed like the only way to really slow him down was to just let him get his while forcing his teammates to make shots. Because as we know, Nikola Jokic's best attribute is his passing. Now in this year's playoffs, the Nuggets matched up with the Timberwolves in a rematch of the 2024 series that the Timberwolves won in 7 games. So in this one, it looked like the Nuggets were probably gonna be out for revenge. Also, I want you to keep in mind that the Timberwolves came into this one a bit hobbled, as Anthony Edwards was battling through pain in his knee before the playoffs even began. And it was because of this knee issue that most people picked the T-Wolves to lose this series. And things were right on schedule after game 1, because the Timberwolves would end up losing that one 116 to 105. And in that game, Nikola Jokic shot pretty efficiently, 11 for 19, 25 points, 11 assists, 13 rebounds, a triple-dub. But as this series went on, things would start to go downhill for the Nuggets and Nikola Jokic. Because in game 2, the Timberwolves were able to pull out a gutsy 119 to 114 win. But what really stood out is that Nikola Jokic, although he scored 24 points, he shot 8 for 20 from the field. This was also the game where Jaden McDaniels called out the entire Nuggets team for being bad defenders. So you essentially got punked in your own building, and now you're headed into Minnesota's house. So you would think Nikola Jokic and the Nuggets team would be fully locked in, out for blood, right? Well, no, because in games 3 and 4, both Nuggets losses, Nikola Jokic shot 7 for 26 and then 8 for 22. The supposed best player in the world did not show up. And it didn't help that Jamal Murray was playing terrible as well. But as the leader of the team, as the best player, as someone who was somehow put into GOAT conversations this early, Nikola Jokic simply didn't do his job. He was getting locked up by Rudy Gobert time and time again. And Jaden McDaniels and that Timberwolves team kept exposing that Nuggets team for the bad defenders that they were.
They're all bad. Yeah, they're all bad defenders.
Now, it was during that same game 4, though, where the Nuggets seemed to have a stroke of luck. Because during that game, Anthony Edwards went down with a hyperextended knee that looked gruesome at the time, and Dante DiVincenzo suffered a season-ending injury as he tore his Achilles. But even then, even though these injuries took place in the first half of that game 4, the Nuggets could not take advantage of it because they still ended up losing due to an incredible 43-point performance by Ayo Dosunmu. Yes, the Nuggets essentially allowed 43 points to someone that was essentially a role player for the Timberwolves.
They're all bad. Yeah, they're all bad defenders.
Now, due to these injuries, it was assumed that the Nuggets would complete a 3-1 comeback because the Timberwolves were now without their starting guard. They're missing their best player in Anthony Edwards. And on top of that, during a Game 5 Nuggets victory, Ayo Dosunmu, who had just come off of that career-high performance, ended up injuring his calf and was going to be out for Game 6. And if that wasn't enough, another key role player in Kyle Anderson was injured as well for the Timberwolves. So the Timberwolves were just riddled with injuries. So now it's time for the Nuggets to easily win Game 6 and then win Game 7 and pull off the 3-1 comeback. Except that's not what happened. Because even though Nikola Jokic showed up for this game, a putrid performance by Jamal Murray ended up being too much to overcome, and the Nuggets would go down to the shorthanded Timberwolves by the score of 110-98.
They're all bad defenders.
Now I know I just said Nikola Jokic showed up for this closeout game, but a player of his caliber cannot lose this game. You're facing a Timberwolves team with so many injuries, and you couldn't get the job done. Yes, your second option played like shit, but if you're being put in GOAT conversations, there's no way you should be losing this game. Also, this one good game doesn't erase the other terrible games that he had during this series. And of course, due to this result, Nikola Jokic is looked at a bit differently right now. Because there's a lot of people on the internet that were saying, how the hell was he put in GOAT conversations in the first place? So a man that was once considered the best player in the world, that was considered somehow in the GOAT conversation, is now viewed as overrated. And while Nikola Jokic is still incredible, a lot of that backlash is honestly warranted, because a player of his caliber should not lose a series like this. Now the irony is, the person that locked him up wasn't just changing Jokic's legacy, he was actually changing his own. I'm sure many of you remember how the Rudy Gobert trade from Utah was viewed at the time, because people thought it was dumb. People were wondering what the hell were the Timberwolves thinking, giving up all of those draft picks and assets for Rudy Gobert. But after 2 trips to the conference finals, that trade started to be viewed a bit differently. And although he still gets hate from certain media members like Shaq, there's nothing, and I mean nothing, that people could hate about this performance that he put on against Nikola Jokic. Rudy Gobert went out there and locked Nikola Jokic up. We have never seen Nikola Jokic look this terrible in a series. And Rudy Gobert was able to do that to Nikola Jokic for multiple games. So now the man that was viewed as a playoff liability, that he was overpaid, he can't guard the perimeter, that the trade from the Utah Jazz was a disaster, he's now viewed as a winner, as a vital part of the Timberwolves team. Just look at the recent moves that the Timberwolves made. They traded away some of their players, and yet none of them were named Rudy Gobert. That just shows you how valuable he has become to the Timberwolves. So 2 big men's legacies changed overnight because of the NBA playoffs. But there's another big man that we need to discuss, and that big man is Jalen Duren. See, during this regular season, Jalen Duren was honestly pretty good, averaging almost 20 points per game and over 10 rebounds. And this led him to become an all-star, as well as being selected to the All-NBA third team. He also played a pivotal role in the Detroit Pistons becoming the #1 seed in the East. So you combine that with the fact that Jalen Duren is about to become a free agent, this season was honestly a dream season and much more. But in the playoffs, that's where those dreams turned into pure nightmares. Because during the playoffs, it cannot be stated enough how absolutely disappointing Jalen Duren was. In the first round, the Detroit Pistons matched up against the Orlando Magic, a team that they were rightfully favored against. Now keep in mind, this is the 1 seed facing off against the 8th seed. But to everyone's surprise, the Pistons fell behind 3-1 in this series. And during these stretch of games, Jalen Duren was honestly pretty awful. He scored double-digit points only 3 times, with the high being only 12 points. And during this stretch, he never recorded a game with double-digit rebounds. And not only that, there were 2 games here where he shot below 50% as a center. This man shot 40% in Game 2 and 30% in Game 3. Now, fortunately for the Pistons, the Magic forgot how to shoot in Game 6 and went on to blow that 3-1 lead. And the Pistons would move on to the second round to face off against the Cleveland Cavaliers. So although Jalen Duren played like crap during the first round, he had a chance to redeem himself in the second round, in yet another series where the Pistons were favored. But the problem is, that redemption just never came. Because during this series, Jalen Duren played like crap yet again. In some ways, it honestly felt like he played worse. Because in games 3, 4, and 5 of this series, Jalen Duren grabbed a pitiful 4 rebounds in game 3, 2 rebounds in game 4, and 5 rebounds in game 5. It got to the point where the Pistons had to seriously consider playing their backup center Paul Reed over their all-star big man. But even after all of this, Jalen Duren still had a chance to redeem himself in a Game 7, at home by the way. But instead, both he and the Pistons did not show up for this game as they got blown out at home by the Cleveland Cavaliers. And in this game, Jalen Duren scored 7 points and 9 rebounds on 42% shooting. 42% as a center. So it's safe to say that Jalen Duren might have just cost himself a lot of money. And it happened all due to one playoff run. One very terrible playoff run. A guy who was so good during the regular season, helped get his team to the #1 seed, and was selected to an All-NBA team, is now looked at as someone who might not even be back on the Detroit Pistons next season. But if you think the drop-off from an All-NBA talent is crazy, wait till you see the drop-off from the MVP himself, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Now, when it comes to SGA, we know about the flopping, we know about the free throws, and we know just how hated both he and the Thunder have become. But the thing is with SGA is at the very least, people have acknowledged that he was Mr. Efficiency, where over the past 2 seasons, he's averaged over 30 points per game on great efficiency, and it's because of these 2 seasons that he's ended up landing back-to-back MVPs. But there's a certain trend that's been happening with SGA recently. Because for whatever reason, it's starting to seem like SGA is a bit of a playoff dropper. Now, it did start during the 2025 playoffs last year, but it got exposed even further during this year's playoffs. Now, I don't want to take this as SGA playing horribly per se during the playoffs, because I think he still was actually really good. And in the first round versus the Phoenix Suns, he was actually pretty dominant. He scored 25 in game 1, 37 in game 2, 42 in game 3, and 31 in game 4. And in 3 out of those 4 games, he was pretty much over 50% from the field, with game 3 being his most efficient game with a whopping 83% shooting. But it was during the Lakers series where I started to look at him a bit differently. Because going into that series, I thought for sure SGA would dominate. This is a team without Luka, a hobbled Austin Reeves, a 41-year-old LeBron, and DeAndre Ayton and Jackson Hayes anchoring the defense on the back end. Outside of Marcus Smart, this team really had no perimeter defense, and they did not have great paint defense either. But to my surprise, SGA really struggled during this series outside of Game 4. And it was to the point where I was more scared of the bench unit for the Thunder rather than the starters with SGA in the lineup. And you could see with these numbers that SGA just didn't seem like himself. 18 points in Game 1, 22 points in Game 2, 23 in Game 3, and he did pick it up with 35 in Game 4. Keep in mind that this is a back-to-back MVP that averaged over 30 points per game in the regular season. And he did end up having some good moments versus the Spurs in the next round, but he also had his struggles as the efficiency just wasn't there. And yes, I understand that the Spurs are a great defense, but as the MVP of the league, you kind of do expect better from your star player. Now, I do understand that SGA was getting blitzed in the Lakers series and the Spurs series, but it was the way he was turning the ball over as well, just silly turnovers, where it just seemed like he wasn't able to handle these double teams properly. And I guess that's going to be a learning lesson for him going into the following seasons, and I do hope that he improves on this going forward. But as of right now, there does seem to be a bit of a noticeable drop-off in his numbers when it comes to the playoffs. But just as SGA's legacy has changed during this playoffs, the man that beat him, Victor Wembanyama, his legacy, well, it had a bit of a roller coaster ride during these playoffs. Now, when it comes to Wemby, he has, of course, been regarded as a generational talent, and rightfully so. This man is a defensive cheat code, and his height and relative quickness really makes him unfair to guard at times. But it was also his first playoffs, so we didn't really know what to expect going into it. And during the first 2 rounds, just like any young player that's in their first playoffs, Wemby had his ups and downs. But even with those ups and downs, they were able to make the conference finals and face off against last year's champions, the Oklahoma City Thunder. And it was during this Thunder series where Wemby's legacy took a huge turn upwards. As during that game 1, he poured in 41 points, and we all remember that iconic Steph Curry-esque three-pointer that tied the game in overtime. It was also during this series where Wemby was dominating, actually almost punking his opponent, Chet Holmgren, throughout the entire series. And somehow, some way, Wemby and the San Antonio Spurs were able to pull off what most people viewed as an upset when they defeated the reigning NBA champions, the Oklahoma City Thunder, in 7 games. And it was at this moment where Wemby was automatically thrust into the best in the league conversations. And honestly, why wouldn't you? In his first ever playoffs, Wemby helps to lead his team to the NBA Finals, and along the way, he pulled off the upset by defeating the reigning NBA champions. But just as quickly as Wemby's legacy rose, it fell even faster. Because during the finals where he faced off against the Knicks, both Wemby and the San Antonio Spurs team would have some brutal, and I mean brutal, moments. Let's start with game 1, where the Spurs would blow a 14-point fourth quarter lead and lose to the Knicks by 10. Then in game 2, blew a 12-point second quarter lead, came back, only for Wemby to make the boneheaded mistake of throwing the ball off of Stephon Castle's back. Then after a huge win in game 3, the moment happened, and not a good one, because the Spurs were up by almost 30 points, and somehow, some way, they blew this lead in the second half. An absolutely historic collapse, leading to the Spurs falling behind 3-1 in this series. And then in game 5, also holding a double-digit lead throughout the game, only to blow that one too. And that was it. In 5 games, the Spurs lost the series. And in all 4 of their losses, they blew double-digit leads. And I understand that this team is young. I understand that the coaching had its issues. And I understand that De'Aaron Fox is an idiot. But at the end of the day, if you're going to put Wemby in best in the world conversations, these types of things just can't happen. So after these playoffs, although Wemby has a bright future ahead of him, the fact is this: he's not at the level that we put him at before the finals even started. He's not the best player in the world, but he certainly has the potential to get there. But just as this 2026 NBA Finals rewrote history in the worst possible way for the San Antonio Spurs, the team that beat them, the New York Knicks, and their star players in Jalen Brunson and Cat, both had their legacies rewritten in the best way possible. Let's start with Karl-Anthony Towns, who in my opinion had one of the biggest redemption arcs I've ever seen. Because before these playoffs, he was known as a guy that was soft, probably can't win, and just not built for playoff basketball. We all remember that infamous moment back on the T-Wolves when Jimmy Butler practically punked the starters, and he basically called out both Cat and Andrew Wiggins. And it was after this moment where this label of being soft and not a winner followed Cat throughout his entire career. Now, things would take a bit of a turn in the positive direction when he helped the Wolves reach the Western Conference Finals back in 2024. And then in 2025, after the Wolves shockingly traded him to the Knicks, Cat would be a part of another great team that made the Eastern Conference Finals. Now, unfortunately for the Knicks, they wouldn't make the finals that year as they would lose to the Indiana Pacers. This, of course, led to the firing of Tom Thibodeau and the hiring of Mike Brown. Now, this is pivotal because during the next season, there were moments where Cat seemed a bit lost on what he should be doing in his new role on this offense. Because the Knicks were having success, but there were moments where Cat just seemed like he was maybe iced out or was just unaware of how to fit in. But that didn't stop him from trying to improve, trying to get better, and during the 2026 playoffs, it seemed like it all came together for Cat. Because he was huge during their run to the finals, and he was even bigger during the finals itself. Keep in mind that this man Cat was the primary defender on Wemby, and Cat has never been known for his defense, but he more than held his own against Wemby. And honestly, there were moments where I actually saw that Wemby was struggling against Cat. Also, during that Game 4 comeback, there were moments where Cat hit some huge shots down the stretch. So Karl-Anthony Towns went from being viewed as a soft, non-winning, non-defensive big to now being viewed as a pivotal part of a championship team with the Knicks of all teams. And I also really want to give a shout out to Cat as well, because he's suffered so much family loss over the past few years. So it's really great to see him overcome all of that and become a champion. Now, when it comes to Brunson, when he signed with the Knicks, the craziest thing about it is it wasn't even viewed positively. We had guys in the media such as Stephen A questioning this move, basically questioning why the hell are the Knicks going all out for Jalen Brunson of all people. Because up until that point, Jalen Brunson hasn't really had much experience running a team by himself. But throughout his tenure with the Knicks, Jalen Brunson has showed up time and time again. He has led this squad to the playoffs every single season he was there, and each time he led the Knicks to at least one playoff series victory. But honestly, that's not even the craziest thing about Jalen Brunson. Because when it comes to him, it's the fact that he's able to do this as an undersized guard. If you've watched any of those videos on YouTube where it talks about certain player archetypes in the NBA that are becoming extinct, one of those archetypes is the undersized guard. And the reality when it comes to Jalen Brunson is that he's a score-first, undersized guard that is not good on defense. But even through all of those limitations, one thing that you can never, and I mean never, deny about Jalen Brunson is that he shows up in the clutch. And whether it's Becky Hammon or any other people in the media, time and time again, Jalen Brunson was proving everyone wrong. And it's crazy because I was watching the podcast with LeBron and he mentioned something very interesting. What Jalen Brunson is doing isn't normal. Because throughout history, undersized guards do not really lead their teams to championships. I believe the only ones that have done it in history are Steph Curry and probably Isaiah Thomas. So for Jalen Brunson to accomplish this in New York is just unbelievable. So shout out to Jalen Brunson on a much-deserved championship, and I'm excited to see where he could take the Knicks going forward. So as you can see, a lot has changed after this year's playoffs. Before these playoffs, Nikola Jokic looked untouchable, until one playoff series suddenly had people questioning things that seemed impossible just a few months earlier. Rudy Gobert turned years of jokes into respect. Jaylen Brown went from MVP conversations to trade rumors. Jalen Duren learned how different the playoffs really are. SGA found out that regular season dominance doesn't automatically translate to June. Victor Wembanyama discovered that being called the best play in the world comes with expectations that can turn into criticism overnight. And on the other side, Karl-Anthony Towns and Jalen Brunson completely rewrote the stories that had followed them for years, proving that one postseason can change how an entire career is remembered. We spend months and sometimes years convincing ourselves that we know exactly who these players are. Then one playoff run comes around and flips everything upside down. Because in this league, legacies aren't written in the regular season, they're written in the playoffs. And the 2026 playoffs may have rewritten more legacies than any postseason we've seen in a very long time. But what do you think was the biggest narrative shift from this year's playoffs? Also, is there a narrative that I didn't mention in the video that you think was even bigger? Let me know in the comments. And of course, if you made it this far and you enjoyed the video, show some love. Hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Also, if any of the videos on your screen pique your interest, go ahead and check them out, or check out my channel for even more content. And of course, thank you for hanging with me today. It's been Dre, and these have been my thoughts. Until next time.
I can't talk on low case 'cause it's sticky. Free tea and free breezy.